Today, we're going to make your Spanish sound much more alive by working with the past progressive, which in Spanish is called el pasado progresivo. This is the form for saying things like was eating, were talking, was raining. This is one of those patterns that feels big at first, and then suddenly becomes very friendly, like a large dog that looks dramatic but just wants a snack. The core idea is simple. In Spanish, you usually build this with a form of estar in the past, plus a verb ending in ando or yendo. So estaba comiendo means was eating. Estaba hablando means was talking. Estaba viviendo means was living. Think of it as two pieces. Piece 1, the helper verb estar in the imperfect past. For A2, the most useful forms are estaba, estabas, estaba, estábamos, estaban. Piece 2, the action in progress. Comiendo, hablando, viviendo, haciendo, durmiendo. Sometimes with a little stem change in some verbs, but today we'll stay mostly with the most useful regular patterns. Quick memory trick. If English uses was or were plus verbing, Spanish often uses estaba or estaban plus the Spanish ing form. Not always in every situation, but very often. That shortcut will help you a lot. Let's build it. Hablar becomes hablando, talking. Comer becomes comiendo, eating. Vivir becomes viviendo, living. So, estaba hablando was talking. Estabas comiendo, you were eating. Estaban viviendo en Madrid, they were living in Madrid. And here's an important little note. In Spanish, you often do not need the subject pronoun if the verb already makes it clear. So instead of saying, yo estaba comiendo all the time, you'll often just hear estaba comiendo. Cleaner, more natural. Now, when do we use this? Usually when we want to show an action in progress in the past, something ongoing. It often sets the scene. It creates the background. Then another action may interrupt it. For example, estaba leyendo cuando sonó el teléfono. I was reading when the phone rang. The reading was in progress. The phone ringing happened during that action. How do you say I was eating when you called? Estaba comiendo cuando llamaste. Estaba comiendo cuando llamaste. Nice. Notice llamaste is the simple past because the call happened as a completed event. So a very common pair in Spanish is background action with estaba plus ando or yendo, and interrupting action with the simple past. Estaba durmiendo cuando llegó el mensaje. I was sleeping when the message arrived. Estábamos cenando cuando empezó la película. We were having dinner when the movie started. How do you say we were watching a movie in Spanish? Estábamos viendo una película. Estábamos viendo una película. Perfect. By the way, viendo comes from ver, to see, not vereando, thankfully. Spanish likes to keep you awake. Ver becomes viendo. Ir becomes yendo. A few common verbs are a little quirky, so it's good to notice them early. Now here's a very practical tip. The past progressive is great for answering the question, what was happening? It is not always the best choice for habits. If you want to say, I used to study every night, Spanish often prefers estudiaba, not estaba estudiando cada noche. Why? Because estudiaba gives the idea of a repeated past habit. Estaba estudiando gives the feeling of being in the middle of it, at a specific moment. So compare these. De niño, jugaba al fútbol. As a child, I used to play soccer. A las 5, estaba jugando al fútbol. At 5 o'clock, I was playing soccer. One is habit. One is action in progress at a certain time. That difference is gold. If you remember only one thing today, remember this. Estaba jugando is a movie scene in progress. Jugaba is more like a repeated pattern or general past situation. Let's make it conversational. How do you say, what were you doing, in Spanish? ¿Qué estabas haciendo? ¿Qué estabas haciendo? Excellent. Haciendo comes from hacer, to do or to make. This is one of the super useful, irregular-looking forms you'll hear all the time. ¿Qué estabas haciendo? Means, what were you doing? And now you can answer in lots of natural ways. Estaba trabajando. I was working. Estaba estudiando. I was studying. Estaba cocinando. I was cooking. Estaba descansando. I was resting. How do you say I was studying at home in Spanish? Estaba estudiando en casa. Estaba estudiando en casa. Good. En casa means at home, and Spanish usually says en casa, not en la casa, for the general idea of at home. Tiny detail, very useful. Let's keep going with scene setting. Weather is very common with this form. How do you say it was raining all afternoon in Spanish? Estaba lloviendo toda la tarde. Estaba lloviendo toda la tarde. Exactly. You can also hear llovía toda la tarde, and that's very natural too. For today, we're focusing on the progressive form because it paints that ongoing picture very clearly. Here's another one. Estaba nevando. It was snowing. Estaba haciendo frío. It was cold. Literally, it was making cold. Spanish loves useful little expressions like that. Now, common mistake alert. English uses was doing a lot, and learners sometimes try to force the past progressive everywhere in Spanish. But Spanish often prefers the simple imperfect for descriptions, habits, age, time, and mental states. For example, era tarde, it was late. Tenía sueño, I was sleepy. Sabía la respuesta, I knew the answer. Not usually estaba siendo tarde or estaba teniendo sueño. That sounds off. So use the past progressive mainly for actions in motion, things unfolding. Let's practice with people. How do you say, they were talking in the kitchen, in Spanish? Estaban hablando en la cocina. Estaban hablando en la cocina. Great. En la cocina. In the kitchen. Nice and practical. And notice hablando, from hablar. Very easy. AR verbs give you ando. That's your best friend today. Hablar, hablando. Trabajar, trabajando. Caminar, caminando. And ER and IR verbs usually give you yendo. Comer, comiendo. Vivir, viviendo. Escribir, escribiendo. Quick mini check. How do you say, she was writing a message, in Spanish? Estaba escribiendo un mensaje. Estaba escribiendo un mensaje. Nice work. Now let's connect this to real-life conversation. Imagine a friend asks, ¿Qué estabas haciendo ayer a las 8? What were you doing yesterday at 8? You might say, Estaba cenando. I was having dinner. Estaba viendo una serie. I was watching a series. Estábamos hablando. We were talking. How do you say, you were sleeping, in Spanish? Estabas durmiendo. Estabas durmiendo. Very good. Durmiendo is one of those common forms worth memorizing because dormir is so useful. If you hear that you change to we in the present, like duermo, don't be surprised that the progressive often has a different stem, durmiendo. Now let's contrast two sentences, because this helps the pattern really stick. Leí un libro. I read a book, or I finished reading a book. Estaba leyendo un libro. I was reading a book. One feels complete, one feels ongoing. Comí. I ate. Estaba comiendo, I was eating. Salieron, they went out. Estaban saliendo, they were going out. So if you want to show the middle of the action, not just the fact that it happened, the past progressive is often your tool. Here's a really common structure. Mientras plus past progressive. Mientras estaba cocinando, escuchaba música. While I was cooking, I was listening to music. And yes, you can hear two past actions unfolding together. Estaba limpiando y estaba cantando. I was cleaning and singing. But in natural Spanish, once the meaning is clear, people often shorten it. Estaba limpiando y cantando. I was cleaning and singing. How do you say we were talking and laughing in Spanish? Estábamos hablando y riendo. Estábamos hablando y riendo. Beautiful. Riendo comes from reír, to laugh. Another good one to notice. One more practical thing. This form often appears with time expressions. A esa hora estaba trabajando. At that time, I was working. En ese momento, estaban comiendo. At that moment, they were eating. Toda la mañana estaba buscando mis llaves. All morning, I was looking for my keys. How do you say I was looking for my keys in Spanish? Estaba buscando mis llaves. Estaba buscando mis llaves. Excellent. Buscar is to look for, and llaves are keys. Very useful if your keys enjoy adventure more than you do. Let's do a small spoken flow together. I'll give you the English, and you say it in Spanish in your head, or out loud if no one is watching strangely. How do you say, I was cooking, in Spanish? Estaba cocinando. Estaba cocinando. How do you say, we were living in Madrid in Spanish? Estábamos viviendo en Madrid. Estábamos viviendo en Madrid. How do you say, what were they doing in Spanish? ¿Qué estaban haciendo? ¿Qué estaban haciendo? You're getting this. So here's the whole lesson in one easy package. To say was doing or were doing in Spanish, use estar in the imperfect, like estaba, estabas, estábamos, estaban, plus the ando or yendo form. Use it for actions that were in progress in the past. It often sets the scene, describes what was happening, or shows an action interrupted by another action. Your memory hook, was or were plus ing, often points to estaba or estaban, plus ando or yendo. Your warning sign, don't use it for everything in the past. For habits or general descriptions, Spanish often prefers the regular imperfect, like trabajaba, vivía, era, tenía. A few takeaways to keep in your pocket. Hablando, comiendo, viviendo. Estaba leyendo. ¿Qué estabas haciendo? Estaban hablando en la cocina. Estaba lloviendo toda la tarde. That's strong, useful Spanish already. If this felt like a lot, that's normal. But if several of these patterns sounded familiar by the end, that means your brain is already building the system. Keep listening, keep repeating, and keep using short, real phrases. That's how this becomes natural. You're not trying to memorize a grammar chart. You're learning to describe a scene, tell a story, and sound more human in Spanish. And that is exactly what you're doing.